I'm ready whenever you are.
Hello and welcome to, I think it's week 6 of the NFL season. And so this is going to be the Packers preview. We've got myself and I'm Oscar and Pablo. So we're going to, I guess, talk about kind of what's happened over the bye week and then looking at Green Bay and I guess matchups and kind of what we can project guess is going to happen. Um, Maybe we'll start with Finn Boner asked a question about Pouncey playing at right guard, because that's where he played at Florida, um, and kind of what that means. And for me, I'm happy Pouncey playing right guard. I think that's probably his best position in regards to skill set and what I prioritize an interior offensive line. I want my best interior offensive lineman at right guard. I probably want my smartest one at center. And I'm not sure you're going to call Mike Pouncey smart, but I mean, there's a difference from off the field smart and football smart. So, but we have seen kind of protection lapses with him um, at centre, so I think you could say he's not perhaps the smartest centre, but kind of the crux of the issue for me is who are you playing at centre then, and I think you're still going to be limited and have issues in the interior offensive line with Samson, Sattel at centre, who's a limited player, can't really do much in the run game, and you can't put him one-on-one. So, I mean, that's the advantage you have with Pouncey at centre, is you can put him on an island, and then you can slide your guards to the tackles, or your tackles to the guards, whichever way you want to do it. And, um, so that's kind of my issue, and with that is who are you playing at centre, and I'd much rather have Shea Smith play, or Billy Turner if he's healthy, or I don't think College is playing well as well. It's interesting. I think kind of the narrative seems to be driven around right tackle as an issue, where it's right tackle is an issue because that's the player playing on an island, whereas left guard centre have been playing as badly, but because they kind of share responsibilities, it gets diluted their impact from a pass protection standpoint, where I think we've seen kind of the biggest issues arise in a run game with the zone read kind of negates one player, so you're just playing hat-on-hat football. There's generally one of the interior players is chipping and going to the second level onto a linebacker, and so you're not particularly, again, asking them to do huge amounts, which we're predominantly seeing inside zone. So I don't know what you think about Pouncey playing right guard, or what would you do with the centre position, or how would you configure the interior line?
Yeah, I mean, I think and Pablo here. Thanks for listening, everyone. Um, I think the interesting thing, if you look back at the beginning of the season, was everybody felt that Samson Sattelli starting at center was going to be a major issue, and I think he's been a little bit overrated. Oscar, you and Ian have talked a bit about him in the past, and I think he hasn't been quite as good as some people think he has, but he's been, I think, still even with that caveat, a lot better than most people imagined he would be. I think, considering how he's played the last few years, even going back before Indianapolis last year, I don't think too many people thought Vitelli would hold his own as well as he has in the center spot. So I think it's kind of a little bit of a luxury to be able to push Pouncey into the guard spot where we've had our issues with Shelley Smith being injured and Dallas Thomas being not very good. I mean, extremely poor in the preseason and then not very good in his play in the last week or two. So I don't I mean, I think to me it's more it's not just where is Pouncey best, but it's also who do you, as a result, who are you putting on the bench? So would we rather put Dallas Thomas slash, banged up Shelley Smith and company on the bench at right guard, or would we rather put Satelli on the bench? Um, and I think Satelli, at least in run blocking, has been okay. Um, I think Pouncey is, how good Pouncey is at center is a debate for another day. I think some people think he's elite. I think most of us think he's good. Um, but I don't have a problem with him playing at guard. I think Satelli playing respectably, at least he's serviceable. He's serviceable at center, and I think that Pouncey playing on the right guard spot might allow us to have a little bit even more of an effective run game, which has already been a pleasant surprise this year so far.
I think it'd be interesting because we haven't seen that much outside zone, and I don't know whether that's due to Satelli, because Pollock's played that a lot, and Shelley's athletic enough. Dallas Thomas has done it, obviously James has done it to Tennessee as well, both of those together. So it'd be interesting if that's one of the aspects Benton has kind of toned down to um, kind of produce a productive running game. I guess like if I was going to give an answer for this, it'd be long term. I would want to have Pouncey play guard, but short term we have, if you look, and maybe we can even talk about this in a way in which investing in assets, we have invested assets at players to play around Pouncey, and we have more invested in Dallas Thomas, Billy Turner, Shea Smith than we do in Dan Collins and Satelli. So that's kind of another way in which if you're looking at it from a short-term, medium to long-term, is it better to play two stopgap interior linemen this year over developing players that you have more invested in? I guess that kind of is another kind of aspect to it. If we do see Pouncey play at right guard, then expect in the third round we'll probably draft Grasu out of Oregon. So that's kind of the first thing I was thinking. And if you're looking, I think it's what we're paying 7.4 million next year on Pouncey's option, which is quite a lot for a centre. But I guess I prefer spending that money on a right guard personally. So I think that's kind of when you're projecting further into kind of how the roster develops outside of next week, then the fact they're considering Pouncey to right guard, maybe it's a nice long-term view. And I'm pretty sure that Pouncey's going to be the highest paid centre if he does be a centre, which from a football talent evaluation standpoint I disagree with putting that number on his play. But
Yeah,
I think it's going to happen.
yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think the Pouncey long-term decision is an interesting one, and I'll be curious to see. I mean, I have it on pretty good word from some people that I trust who are close to the organization that for whatever reason, Steve Ross for sure, and then Philbin. I don't know if it's because of Steve Ross or because Philbin really believes it, but Steve Ross for sure really, really loves Mike Pouncey. Um, with all the off-field nonsense in the last couple years, a lot of us wondered. I mean, I actually went out on a limb and said that I thought Pouncey was going to be traded after the whole Jonathan Martin thing, and it was quite the opposite. I mean, I think that they backed Pouncey every step of the way. So I don't think I guess I'd be a little bit surprised if they let Pouncey walk. So maybe from a long-term contract standpoint, it would be more prudent to put him at guard because, like you said, at center he's going to get paid. And I agree. I don't know if that's really a great utilization of resources when you look at the roster overall.
I think he'll probably get paid regardless, but it's just where would you rather invest that asset? And yeah, I don't believe in spending over 7 million on a centre a year. And I think you can see, I think it's not only kind of like hearing that Pouncey is like a respected part of the organisation or a key stone in the building. They used him as part of a kind of recruitment of Albert. He was at kind of that dinner with, I think it was Ross, Philbin, Hickey, Tannehill, and Pouncey with Brandon Albert. And so you can kind of see he's part of that recruitment aspect and being sold to players as this is our quarterback, this is our centre, this is our offensive hub of the team, our core. So I think it's not only in kind of, and also paying him 7.4 million on an option, that's a lot of money for any. I think, yeah, I'm not sure whether I'll put him next year ranked with centres, but it'll be top 4 or 3. So that, yeah, that'd be an interesting thing to. Shall we move away from the offensive line unless you have anything else, and maybe?
No, I mean, I think an interesting segue in terms of this specific upcoming week, as we move to the Packers specifically, is how we think the Packers can be beat. For me, I think it's instructive to look at a team, and we now have 5 games the Packers have played. They've won 3, they've lost 2, and I think that there's been some really interesting differences in the games that they've won and then the ones that they've lost, and then some things that have been pretty consistent in all of their games. I think most people who have looked into the Packers a bit realize that one area that they've been very deficient has been in their run defense. And so looking into kind of where Pouncey plays this weekend, but also just the offensive line play and the running back play as a whole, I think that the run game for Miami is going to be a key to this game. Just looking at some overall statistics for Green Bay, and I will have something up on this on Findepth either later this evening or tomorrow morning. But Green Bay has allowed in their 5 games so far, has allowed over 100 yards in every single game. Has allowed over 200 yards twice. Against Seattle week 1 when they lost, they allowed 207 rushing yards, and then against Chicago they allowed 235 yards in a game that they actually won. But in all 5 games they've allowed over 100 yards rushing. When you look at the rush yardage per game, they're averaging their defense is allowing 163 rush yards per game, which is worst in the league. It's 32nd out of all the teams, and they've allowed 6 rushing touchdowns, which is 28th in the league overall. And then in terms of their rush yards per attempt, they're allowing 4.6 rush yards per attempt, which is 25th in the league. So they're just getting completely gashed in the run game, and I think that is an area that we have all been pleasantly surprised with Miami. There's certainly some questions, not just with Pouncey, but also with Moreno, considering his arm. And, most of us, at least me, I thought he'd be out for at least another week or 2 beyond this. So I never even considered it a possibility that Moreno would be coming back this game. But then we've had some mixed reports back and forth with this brace that he's wearing, if he's going to be able to carry the ball. We all know how much Philbin hates turnovers. And if it's going to be a turnover risk, I'm not sure, it's going to be a risk that the team is willing to take. And then there's the whole question of, how much more does Moreno bring to the table over Miller, who, quite frankly, has looked quite good in the last several games. But I don't know if you have any thoughts in terms of Green Bay's run defense and their vulnerability there. I mean, clearly teams have been running all over them, and I think that I would be pretty surprised if that's not a significant part of the Miami game plan this weekend.
Well, I think Green Bay being pretty historically terrible against zone read in particular, if you think back to kind of the playoff games against San Francisco, where I think Kaepernick pretty much, or Green Bay lost the last one against just crashing that defensive end when he just stayed put and played to contain. Green Bay probably progress in that game. Interesting, I think the defensive line's been really good for Green Bay in pass rush situations. And their nose tackle in particular, I think it's Guyon, played really well against the Vikings. But I think they've obviously been fragile against the run. It's whether we will do this when it comes down to situationally how will we stick with the run. We haven't seen the coaching staff that's been prepared to stick with the run when we're behind or when we're in front. So how much do they stick with it if it starts off slow or if they get behind early, which is very possible with the opposing quarterback. So that's going to be kind of a big question. I think the running is relatively easy with the zone reads keeping that basically a 6-7 man box facing the whole time with Tannehill holding the perimeter defender. So I think that helps the running game quite a lot, as you basically don't have an extra defender that the running back either has to get through contact or make them miss in space, as long as all the blocking set up in front, and we've seen quite good, clear early reads defined by the lineman. And whether we see kind of Green Bay played quite a lot of press, so whether we'll see kind of that kind of early screen game set up as much. We haven't really faced a huge amount of press. And when we haven't really been passing into the flats a huge amount. So that'll be kind of an interesting element to look for as kind of a supplement to the run game we've talked about all year, using the screen or passing into the flats when you want to take the pressure off the pass rush, but still get positive yards easily without having to throw downfield. So that'll be kind of an interesting element into that area. I think you can hurt Green Bay passing as well and play action and when they're trying to overcommit to the run. What will be interesting on the other side of the ball is how Miami play against outside zone, because we haven't really seen Miami face that in the Vikings game in particular. I think that's the first drive, maybe Lacey, I think he had 3 explosive plays outside zone runs, which is quite interesting. I guess Lacey's on the kind of back you would associate in outside zone, but he was patient pressing the hole and hitting it hard and being really effective. And so that'll be interesting as kind of how we play against that kind of running game. And I think something that it may have been talked about a lot or not is, although Green Bay you could say they've had a week and a half bye, they've also had a week prepping for pretty much the same defense look-wise from a Zimmer defense to Coil one. They do quite a lot of similar kind of blitz packages and lots of everyone up at the line of scrimmage pre-snap, and then you don't know who's dropping and coming. So I think that kind of maybe negates somewhat the bye week advantage, even though it's Green Bay on a bye week and a half. I don't know if you've got any. I know that Vegas guy you like was saying how he adds, was it 0.1, 0.5 for a bye week, 0.7.5 for Thursday night football bye week. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on kind of what those advantages, disadvantages are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that anytime you have a team coming off a bye week, they're going to come in more well rested, and I think there's good evidence to suggest that those teams come in, and unless they start out flat, which is obviously a little bit of a concern with this Miami team always, let alone after a bye week. Overall, you get guys healthy and they come back. So when you have Green Bay coming off a little bit of extra rest after their Thursday night game versus Minnesota, I think that advantage that Miami has coming off the bye week is a little bit nullified. It's not quite as significant as when you have a team coming off their normal amount of rest. And I think you're right in terms of Minnesota, has Zimmer as their coach. Very similar looks on defense to what Coyle is doing. They both obviously played or coached together in Cincinnati in their prior jobs, and I think there's a lot of similarities in those defenses. So it is interesting that Green Bay will have time to prepare probably similarly. Obviously, the personnel are totally different, but the schemes are not that different. Um, I think going to the Green Bay sort of the Green Bay matchup overall, what's interesting to me in looking at them and what I did, and again, I'll have a piece on this on Findepth either this evening or tomorrow morning, but in looking at the differences in their wins and their losses, defensively and offensively, is that, quite frankly, on defense, they've looked pretty much the same every single game. They've given up essentially the same number of yards, right around 370 yards a game. They've given up almost exactly the same number of rushing yards per game in their wins and losses, 100, right around 160 rushing yards per game. The big difference in their games, in their wins and losses, has been in their offense, and predominantly, if you put aside the Minnesota game, which was just a complete domination game, similar to our game against Oakland, the biggest difference has been in their passing offense. In Green Bay's 3 wins, they've thrown for an average of 260 yards. In their losses, they've thrown for an average of 168 yards. Um, and their total yardage has reflected that as well. 355 yards in their wins, 246 yards in their losses. What's interesting about their 2 losses against Seattle and Detroit is if you look at those 2 games, I think that Seattle and Detroit stopped Green Bay's passing offense in 2 very different ways. Um, Seattle primarily stopped the Green Bay pass game through a very strong pass rush that had Rodgers uncomfortable and on edge the entire game, and that was the main. They played well. Seattle has a dominant defense. We all know that, but that was really the crux of their defenses. They had him under pressure. They had him under duress. Detroit, on the other hand, actually their defensive line, which is obviously also a very, very strong defensive line, had a good game against them. But if you actually look at the game and look at the statistics and look at kind of how that game went, it was more through better defensive secondary coverage. And the Detroit secondary had a very good game against them. They still got some pressure on Rodgers, but they kind of shut him down through keeping the passing lanes shut down. The other thing that Detroit did, getting back to the Miami run game, is that their time of possession, Detroit's time of possession against Green Bay was 64%. So they had the ball for way over half the game, and I think sometimes the best strategy for keeping a guy like Aaron Rodgers in an offense that can be as efficient as the Green Bay offense from scoring is actually just to keep the ball out of their hands, and I think that gets back to the Miami run game. If Miami can control the ball running the ball, and that's less time for Rodgers to be throwing the ball. And that Green Bay offense is extremely efficient. Their yardage is not that impressive, but their points per game is 7th in the league at 27 points per game.
But he
They put up.
be successful with explosive plays as well, which is, I think that's when we've seen, in particular with the Minnesota game, those explosive plays that got them to an early lead, and then they can kind of, their defense is good enough now that they can suffocate a team when they become one-dimensional and have to pass. I thought it was interesting. Minnesota though could just run it pretty much. If it was 3rd and 4, and they would run and pretty much know they're getting it. I think that's, if we see that from Lays, I know he loves to run 3rd and 7, but whether he'll run 3rd and 4 will be interesting. I think if we can set the tone running early, stay on schedule through 1st and 2nd down, then that'll be a really promising start and way to stay in the game early on. But sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I agree. I mean, I think speaking about keys to this game, I think there's a few keys. I think there's a few keys to every game, but first of all, I agree with you completely. I think we have to be disciplined and not giving up. Miami has to not give up on the run game. I think if Miami tries to play in a shootout, in a pass game against Green Bay, it's just not going to go well. I don't think too many teams can get into a shootout with Green Bay and win. Um, and I think it'll be tempting to start passing the ball a lot because Green Bay will probably put up some points. They put up points against pretty much everybody. So I think that the idea that you're going to shut them down completely is not realistic. Um, it's just what you're going to do in response. Uh, I think that looking at what are Miami's strengths, we've beaten this horse to death all season. Miami's defensive line is extremely strong, and we know that even the best quarterbacks, if you look at their passing under pressure stats, even the best ones don't do as well under pressure. Rodgers is very good when he gets blitzed and you don't get pressure. He'll punish you for that. But if you can get him under pressure when you blitz, then you know you can mess him up a bit like Seattle did in the first game of the season. So I think Miami's defensive line will be key. I think something that you heard a lot of the players talking about this week in their interviews and in the press conferences has been playing until the end of the play because Rodgers can really extend plays both inside and out of the pocket. He can wriggle his way out of tricky situations and make just crazy passes that'll punish you if you have prematurely quit. So I think the assignment discipline of our secondary is going to be put to a major test this week. Hopefully the defensive line can get enough pressure where the secondary doesn't have to play for, you know, a ton of time every single play, but I do think that the secondary is going to have to be making sure to play through the end of the whistle, and because Rodgers will punish you after you think the play is long over.
Well, as you're kind of talking about the secondary, and last week we kind of, I guess we talked about the Rashad Jones coming back and how that, I guess, brings more questions and answers as into what roles Delmas will sit into now, and Wilson, kind of all the reports being relatively loose as to what will happen. And we've also, with Finnegan now being not a certainty to play what will happen at that boundary corner, and then turning into nickel, we assume Jimmy Wilson's going to play the nickel corner role. And then it'll be interesting. I think Jamar was starting to close in on starting time over Will Davis, and me and Ian kind of spoke about it last week when Jamar Taylor's played. He's pretty much done what he's been asked to do, and he's been put on Jimmy Graham and Gronkowski, which, and I mean, against Jimmy Graham, he lost a jump ball, and when you're 5'11" against the best tight ends in the league, I think generally you're going to not win that jump ball. And on Gronk, he looked pretty good, and Will Davis, he's a frustrating player because you see the talent, you see he makes plays on the ball, but then he just gets so lost and makes plays twice as hard for himself by turning the wrong way. He has really bad ball awareness, and this stems back to when I evaluated him at college as well. If he can stay on his toes and everything's in front of him, he is a really aggressive and fun player to watch and can be effective. It's just as soon as he's running towards his own end zone, he just has no idea where the ball is, loses his receiver, gets stuck kind of between the two. And I think that's kind of where, when plays break down, he's going to lose. I fear he will lose his receiver more often than not. If we see him on Jordy Nelson, and kind of double moves, and I would target him pretty much every down if I was Aaron Rodgers. And we were kind of talking about kind of the passing game and how our defensive line can win us games. I think it's kind of something interesting if you think about last year. We won more games against better quarterbacks. And perhaps that's partly down to when you're facing an offense with a better quarterback, inherently they're going to rely more on that quarterback, whether it's because they've invested more in him. He's obviously the most talented player on their team, so they're going to ask him to throw the ball. And in a certain extent, that plays into our hands playing more talented quarterbacks because they're going to drop back, and then that gives us an advantage for our best players to hit that quarterback. And
Yeah,
particularly, so I think that's like an interesting dynamic. And I know lots of people talk about, oh, we lose to bad teams, we sometimes beat better teams. No one really talks about why that may be. So if you have any kind of thoughts on that.
yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting theory that maybe the better teams that have better quarterbacks are going to rely on more traditional passing games that we're going to be more effective against. I think it'd be, I don't know if it's empirically been looked at. It'd be interesting to look at, quarterback by whatever measure of quality you want to look at and how Miami's done against them. I do, you know, I agree that Green Bay is definitely pass heavy. If uh, looking at their numbers, their yardage per game is 309.2, which is actually 28th in the league. So they're amongst the top five worst teams yardage per game. And then if you look at their breakdown, they're 71% pass yards per game, 29% rush yards per game. They're throwing for about 220 pass yards per game. They're running for about 90 yards per game. And what's really amazing about that is that even with those yardage statistics, which are not impressive, they are still scoring the seventh highest number of points per game, and Rodgers has thrown for 12 touchdowns this year, which is tied for the second best in the league. So I completely agree with you that they are predominantly pass dependent and very traditionally sort of quarterback and pass centric. Um, the interesting question to me, which was something that came up on Twitter a couple times this week, is what is the more prudent strategy? It's kind of pick your poison in terms of what do you choose to focus on shutting them down, and this gets back to our safety play and our secondary play. Uh, Coyle specifically mentioned in his press conference, I think Jelani Jenkins talked about it, I think maybe it was Audric or one of the defensive linemen also mentioned, they all sort of said, first and foremost, we want to stop the run, which you look at Green Bay statistics, they've had one game against Minnesota where they thoroughly demolished Minnesota, but every other game they haven't run the ball really at all. Now, we know what Eddie Lacy did last year, so it's not to say that we don't think they can run the ball, but so far this year they have not been an effective a running team. I think the more interesting question is, you know, I don't think anybody would disagree that making an offense one-dimensional, if possible, is good. Whether you make an offense, relying on their run or their pass. To some extent, defenses can scheme around offensive play and try to push the game a certain way, right? I mean, Miami could really stack the box and force the pass game if they really want to focus on the run game. There's things that can be done with the safety play, as you know, and I'll be interested to see what they do with Rashad Jones coming back in that regard. Um, but I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts in terms of, in combination with our safeties having some more options now with Rashad Jones coming back, and just general scheme-wise on defense, whether it makes more sense to try to shut down their weakness, which is the run game, to the extent that you can focus on that, versus being a little bit more worried about what their strength has been, which has been their pass game.
Well, I think to a certain extent you can't really shut down, or you can't push a team away from passing to run, due to the nature of when you get ahead in points, teams are going to pass on you because that's the quickest way to get the ball downfield and highest percentage way to quickly do that. I think it's interesting that Jenkins and Aldrich were the two talking about stopping the run, so perhaps it's been drilled into more the front seven have to do it alone because they want to drop everyone into coverage or give balance to that so that they also can't get passed on. So I don't think you want to be having one safety when we don't really have a true free safety anyway, with some of the liabilities we have at corner, and then with one of the best active quarterbacks playing at the moment, playing at a very high level. So perhaps that's maybe why Jenkins and Aldrich in particular are bringing up, because they've been told that's one of their key roles is to stop that because they're not getting any help. Whether we see that be true or not, we've seen Delmas quite aggressive at the line of scrimmage, particularly against the run. We've seen Jimmy Wilson as well have tackles for loss. So Coyle has wanted to attack the line of scrimmage with safeties. So that'll be kind of interesting how that pans out. And we see quite a lot now of 4-3 teams try and funnel the run game to the weak side linebacker. So that could also be a reason why Jenkins is bringing it up in particular. And we've seen in outside zone, he's going to be stressed a lot as well, either backside pursuit or in theory setting the edge against, or not allowing kind of the bounce plays outside, whether it's Wake or himself. So that perhaps that's kind of why those two players in particular have brought it up. But I think we'll see that more, whether there's safety help or not, obviously in the game versus different personnel. We generally Packers have been at 11 personnel, and that's where they've been most successful. So generally in that kind of situation, we're going to see a lot of nickel defense, I think. So that'll be kind of interesting. Kind of they are going to stress one of those two sophomore second-year corners. One of those guys is going to be out in the field 60% of the time. So that's, to me, that's kind of where the game could get one loss, is who's playing there and what happens against them. So they're going to be either against Devontae Adams, Randall Cobb, or Jordy Nelson. So there's not really a great matchup there any way around. Is there any we haven't really talked about much about the passing game of Miami. So I know there's been kind of a lot to talk about Juwan James facing Peppers, and not so much about Clay Matthews, although they're kind of interchangeable which sides they rush at. I'm not particularly worried about James in pass protection. I think we've seen a couple of times where he's tried to rely on his length, and he's realised rushes are a bit faster in the NFL than they were in the SEC. So his length isn't as being as effective. But in regards to pass protection, I mean, he's played pretty well. And I don't think you're going to worry about Peppers and Clay Matthews as much as any other team will be, but I think we're not overly worrying about it at that matchup. And Albert's been pretty phenomenal, and then the interior line, I think Buron, if Satelli does play, that could be a pretty bad matchup in pass protection. I mean, this is one of the issues with playing Pouncey at right guard, is we've been seeing our centre get beaten with first step quickness by nose tackles, and it just happens that that defender has beaten him so badly he runs out of the play, or it's the backside of the play, so it doesn't blow it up. But just because that play isn't getting blown up doesn't mean that something terrible has happened. And so I find it hard to ignore that, because eventually that's going to get blown up. And yeah. So that'll be interesting to watch. I guess we'll find out sooner or later what will happen at centre, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling about the Green Bay pass rush is that, they have a respectable pass rush. As you mentioned, some of the players they have who are fairly impressive against pass rush are, they have Julius Peppers. Their defensive linemen, actually, Daniels and Datone Jones, have both been respectable as well. Clay Matthews is good he's good in the pass rush. I think one of the things that you have to do against a team like Green Bay that's pretty good in pass rushing, but really struggles in terms of those same players, as well as their linebackers, which have been not very good against the run, is that you kind of have to get them off balance. And I guess my feeling is that Miami I think our offensive line, if we get into a pass-heavy, sort of pass-centric game approach, then we'll be in trouble. I think that if we can keep running the ball with some regularity and kind of spread that defense out a bit, um, it'll make the offensive line a little less susceptible to this pass rushing strengths that Green Bay has. And I think it also just makes sense because that's where the Green Bay defense struggles to begin with. And that's how teams have been attacking them so far. Teams have been pretty effective against them running the ball. I think one of the things that we've all felt a little bit uneasy about this year has been that not even just this year, but going back to last year's, I'm not. It's hard to predict a lot of these games, not just because the NFL is unpredictable, but because you don't always necessarily get the sense that the Dolphins coaches are game planning in a way that necessarily totally makes sense. So I don't know. I mean, all these things make sense, right? I think Green Bay's run defense has been susceptible to some pretty big yardage put up against them. I think their pass rush is pretty impressive. So logic would suggest that you try to run the ball, get them off balance, and then kind of in a backwards way, use the run to set up the pass. And I think our play action passing has been pretty effective when we've done that. I just don't know if our coaches will do that.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of press. I think we're going to see a ton of slants like we did against Kansas City. That just seems to be Lazer's go-to route versus press to try and get that early separation. But I mean, we don't really. When we're not having players catch the ball in contested areas, with players coming down behind them, whether you want to keep doing that, I'm not sure. So maybe we see more of a screen game. Maybe we see more of those kind of stacked sets where there was a lot of screenshots of 3 Dolphins receivers and 1 Raiders DB. We kind of saw that being a lot like Wallace TD, where it's passing the flat with then 2 blocks in front. So perhaps we see that to kind of negate some press and to get kind of a bit more distance between the receivers. So that'd be kind of an interesting area to look at as well, how Laser reacts to a more press defense. We've seen a couple of times. We're going to see it more, obviously, against the Jets. It's quite prominent. Patriots have started using it a bit more now that Brown was going to be back, or has been back. So we haven't really talked about the receiving core. Brandon Gibson's out, which maybe he's going to practice catching for a while. And so Damian Williams is back, so I'm not sure if he will have a significant role. We are seeing kind of the 4th and 5th receiver get more snaps than they ever did last year. There's a slight more rotation. I think just everyone just wants to see that unit catch balls being pretty ridiculous, the amount of drops. So is there anything, and Clay obviously to emerge from his contract year slumber. I don't know if there's anything in that unit.
No, I mean, we kind of talked about this last week on the bye week, you, Ian, and myself. I don't have a great explanation for the Miami wide receiver play in the first few games and then what they did against Oakland. I mean, Oakland, it's a little bit hard to get too excited about it because of just the overall weakness of that team. But
and cornerback is their biggest weakness.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not going to get too excited, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know how much the quarterback. I mean, I don't know how much the corners and the secondary overall matters if the ball is hitting you in the hands and you're not catching it.
Yeah.
And so I felt like, as silly as it sounds, I sort of felt like the intangibles, just the overall wide receiver and quarterback energy against Oakland was just so much better as compared to the first 3 games that I just wonder if the wide receivers and Tannehill will come out in sync and with good energy like they did against Oakland. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much of it was related to all the Philbin stuff with Tannehill. I don't think anybody. I mean, some people think that's what it was. I don't really buy it. But I don't really have a good explanation for why the wide receivers have had such a high amount of drops in some games and then other times look good. I think Mike Wallace, for all the crap a lot of us have given him in the past, has actually been a pleasant surprise in terms of his effort level. I mean, the guy still doesn't really extend his arms, and and he doesn't make catches that you would hope that a number one wide receiver who's getting top five wide receiver money would make. But he's playing hard, and he's can obviously stretch the field, so he does some things that I think aren't always obvious on the box score. I do agree that Charles Clay. I'm if it was just one or two games, I would wonder if if it was just a matchup thing or if it was a new scheme. But now that we're, you know, getting into the middle of the season, I'm starting to wonder what the story is here.
And it was the tail end of last season as well, so and that's kind of when teams were kind of scheming against him as well as the main threat. So I think that's going to be a really interesting kind of story to watch. How much money he asked for, how we value him. I wouldn't say the tight end draft class is great. There will be some pretty interesting free agents, but whether we would have the money to go after compete for them is maybe another question we could do. So yeah, I think that'll be a really interesting if we kind of see this plateauing of play, what his market value would be and how the team approach him. Obviously, I think fans, it's like we love the big plays, and there's games like everyone remembers the Steelers game where he broke 2 tackles, but I'm pretty sure that was his only touch of that game or his only significant play, and that was kind of the last thing I can remember him doing significant. So it's kind of like the Deion Sims catch the season before. That was kind of why people liked him, but that was the only thing he did in 200 snaps. The rest was mediocre blocking. And Lynch is pretty much the same player as Sims, so the tight end position is interesting. We've got Gator Hoskins, who is pretty much a Charles Clay clone. If you can speed up his development 1 year quicker than Charles Clay's when he kind of came to prominence in his third year, and perhaps that's kind of projecting forward again into the off-season. What we may see, I like to project more than maybe being not having any of the glory years of the Dolphins. I'm always looking ahead instead of surviving the season.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always interesting to look at a team and what are they trying to do right now just to survive and win and get by and sacrifice for the long term, and then what also makes sense for the long term. I think the Pouncey thing gets into that a little bit. You know, what makes sense for him in the long term versus what makes sense for him this week. Similarly, you know, some things you just don't have any control over. I mean, Charles Clay should be our premier tight end, and it's just a matter of whether we scheme him right or he plays well. And that'll make a difference in terms of his contract, considering he's in a contract year. I think in a perfect world, I mean, I think Charles Clay would have a good game this weekend. I think if you look at what a few of the other teams have done tight end wise against Green Bay, that defensive line linebackers sort of susceptibility has been in coverage has been put to a test. I mean, Martellus Bennett on Chicago in the game that Green Bay actually won, even though Chicago put up a ton of yardage. Martellus Bennett actually had 134 yards on 9 receptions. I mean, that's a massive game. And then Zach Miller in the first game that Green Bay lost to Seattle to open the season, Zach Miller also had a good game too. I think, yeah, I mean, from a game planning standpoint, if Charles Clay was the Charles Clay we looked at last year, who had massive plays that changed the games for us, he'd have a good game this weekend. But I don't know. Again, I don't think anybody knows if this is like a scheme thing or Charles Clay is just off his game, or if, you know, he was banged up a little bit. You sometimes when you can't really explain something.
Really athletic cut though, and so that's why he made. I think it was on a comeback, maybe a 12-yard comeback, and he was pretty much at a 45-degree angle, and so like jumping into it both feet to come back to the ball. So I don't think you do that if you're worried about your knee or leg, or so that's kind of got me hesitant on whether it really is an injury issue, because normally you'll see a player be a step slower, a bit hesitant in their moves, but he was very decisive and athletic in that move, but still not making the same plays, and perhaps that's a lot of his big plays were fortuitous. There was the kind of ball that hit him in double coverage that kind of hit him on the back shoulder, and then he rotated away and went for a touchdown. He broke breaking tackles out of two arms in snow. So maybe that's part of it, is players are tackling him harder to the ground. He's not the two kind of tight ends use like Martellus Bennett. They're more kind of a jump ball, box out, the DB kind of tight end, whereas Clay, he's more of a big slot player almost, where you want to hit him in stride and get his momentum going forward. He's not very, he's not really high. We're not seeing him ever high point balls on like little roll count comebacks or. So it's interesting. I think he's a different type of tight end. He's not one of those 6'6" guys that you just throw it up and he can jump and catch it. He has some limitations in the air, but he's maybe more athletic on the ground, and that's where he was beating teams, and where we haven't really seen him be as successful, because he hasn't got that height. If he is a bit slower on the ground, then that is making his game less effective.
Yeah, it's also hard to totally isolate Charles Clay from the rest of the offense and just the overall chemistry and the overall rhythm of the offense. Oakland was the first game that Miami really put it all together, and I think everybody agrees that can't get obviously too excited again because Oakland is what they are, but the Miami pass game hasn't been really humming the way you'd like to see it go. All season except for really against Oakland. I mean, obviously against Buffalo was a complete disaster. But even in the first game against New England, it was mostly Sean Moreno in the second half, completely going crazy. So I don't know. I mean, sample size, we don't have that many games yet, so maybe we'll start to see some regression to what we expected people and the offense overall to do. Maybe this is the game Charles Clay starts to get in rhythm with the rest of the offense, and the pass game continues to kind of progress. Brady Quinn, who Miami had in the preseason and trying out for a backup spot. He has a new website that he's doing with Sage Rosenfels, also of Miami Dolphins fame, and it's called Football by Football. And I think some people have read it who are listening probably, but it's kind of a neat idea. I mean, it's football players who are retired or pretty much done talking about what's actually happening in the week and behind the scenes, and sort of dispelling some myths. Anyway, Brady Quinn wrote a piece before the Oakland game, sort of talking about the ridiculousness of giving up on Ryan Tannehill at that point of the season. I don't think anybody thought we were giving up on him, really, but Philbin's comments were what they were. I don't think they were, a glowing endorsement of the guy. So anyway, Brady Quinn, one of the points he made was not to underestimate, and he talked about this actually last week on Miami radio, not to underestimate the amount of time and the amount of repetition it takes, especially in the NFL now, where your practice time has been cut down significantly, for a new offense to get installed and for a quarterback to become comfortable in that new offense. You're calling similar plays, but it's a new language. We all know Tannehill played under Mike Sherman's system since college. And Brady Quinn just felt like it was kind of crazy to think that the offense would be in sync when it's a new offensive coordinator, a new language, and everything is kind of changing by game 4. So I think there's something to that. I mean, we talk about other units coming together, right? We talk about offensive lines over the course of the season playing in sync together. I think secondary play changes a lot during the season, but I don't know if people always give quarterbacks and wide receivers the benefit of the doubt as much as they do other units. And Um, I guess I'm still sort of hopeful and optimistic that we will continue to see this offense progress over time.
And I think maybe the biggest underestimation is that Tannehill's still only in his second and a quarter year, and you see quarterbacks progress year on year. I mean, we're seeing the best quarterbacks at the moment are Philip Rivers, Aaron Rodgers, and Peyton Manning, and they're all over 30. And yes, you have to be a very talented quarterback to stay in the league that long to start with, but I don't think they're playing their best football at the moment, and you only it's so much of it's a mental game. We're seeing Peyton playing almost half the physical player he was, but mentally he's controlling the team and being able to win. And so I don't think people are giving. I don't think any player gets kind of the time they should be now to develop. And maybe playing against Aaron Rodgers is kind of the perfect example of players. You shouldn't judge them, in particular quarterbacks, until way after their third year, considering when Aaron Rodgers was drafted and then started playing. So maybe that will be a reason to kind of be a bit more patient. Is look at if we do lose, look at the quarterback who beat you and why he's in such a good position now. Um, so I know you love predictions. So do you want to make any predictions before we head off about the game or the rest of the
Yeah.
year?
No, I'm not going to do the rest of the year because I get mad because people get mad at me when I do that because I tell other people not to do it, and so then if I do it, then people call me a hypocrite. But but you know, I think it's a little bit rosy to expect Miami to beat Green Bay. Quite frankly, I mean, I think Green Bay is a very good team, and I think Miami is a team that's trying to become above average. Um, I think that Green Bay, their offensive firepower with Rodgers and those receivers. Eddie Lacy has not been very good. The running game has not been very good, but they had a great game against Minnesota, so I'm a little bit fearful that that was them starting to heat up again because they had a fine running game last year. Um, I'm a little bit worried that Green Bay will come out and score efficiently like they do, and we'll get behind, and then we won't have the discipline to stick with the run game, which can be very effective. If I had to predict what I really feel like is going to happen, I think it's probably a decently high-scoring game, but they beat us by two possessions, something like 31-20 or 33-24, something like that. We put up points, but they put up a little bit more. Um, I don't. I think there's three outcomes I can see happening. I think Green Bay beats us by a couple possessions like that and has a big game from Rodgers and company. I think we maybe keep it a little bit closer if we are disciplined and they just beat us because they're good, and that happens against good teams, and they just beat us by three or something. And then I think the other possibility is that we win a close game. I don't see us blowing them out. I just think that they can score too many points for us to blow them out. And even if they get behind and they become one-dimensional in the pass game, I still think they'll score like that. Um, so I'm hoping we win by. I hope we win, obviously, but I think if we do, we win in a close game. I think realistically, they beat us by two possessions, and they score probably somewhere between 30 to 35 points.
Well, I don't really think about results or like predictions. I guess I try not to procrastinate too much about it, but I'll say we'll win and have a fourth quarter comeback or something like that. But I've got a rest of the year prediction. Kind of been looking at the usage of Miller in particular, and I mean, he's if he's kind of on his mean average reception or targets for this year, he's going to have more targets than he has his entire pro and college career combined. So that's, I mean, pretty crazy kind of the usage disparity between the rest of his life and now. But I'm pretty confident that this coaching staff has a touches limit on Miller. Only twice has he had over 20 touches ever in Miami. So I'm going to make a prediction if Lamar Miller's healthy for the rest of the season, he has between 12 and 20 touches a game, and 2 of those are through the air minimum. Okay.
All right, I like it. I like it. I think for all the fantasy people out there, which I'm not, but we'll see what happens. I know everyone's very worried about No. Moreno coming back because it might cut into Miller's production. But from a Miami Dolphins fan standpoint, I think we should all be excited to have more than one running back we can rely on because it's nice to have a couple backs. So,
and we've seen Lamar Miller's the first out of the gate, and I think that always kind of carries some. I think we're always going to see this Philbin, as long as he's the head coach here, we're always going to see a committee style back in the same way Green Bay have at the moment. I mean, most people would rather see Lacey play every time. I mean, this is just when fantasy becomes selfish and doesn't enjoy football. So, I mean, I don't really care who the running back is. I want to see competent football, and generally running a running back every single play, you don't really get a huge amount of competence unless you have one of the 2 or 3 best running backs in the league. Then it's kind of smart to do it. I think we see Miller open every drive. He's got the most. Again, it comes down to me. It's like what they have invested in him, and he also has within him explosive plays, which Marino has physical plays. Miller has explosive plays, and I think when you're starting a game, if you can get an explosive play in that first drive, it can really swing the game early. And whereas maybe Marino is someone you want later in the game when you need to get that. So I've been talking about this quite a bit. There's this kind of myth that Marino is better in pass protection. We saw in the first week Marino was getting subbed out for Miller to go in third down in pass protection. Every single pass, any target to a running back was to Lamar Miller in the running game after Marino had 700 yards receiving the year before with Peyton Manning. So there's this kind of myth that it's not being substantiated by the coach's use, and it's not substantiated in tape study or statistical study of pressure that Marino is better at pass protection. I don't know where people are getting this from, but it's utter trash.
But I mean, PFF agrees with you. They got Moreno. He's got a minus 1.6 pass block grade, and they've got Miller, who's got a 0.2 pass blocking grade. To me, I think one of the nice things about this discussion with Miller and Moreno and the amount of time we've dedicated to talking about running backs already this year is there was a lot of around draft time. There was a lot of discussion about the running back position being dead. We know that running backs are going much later in the draft. We know that we know that there's plenty of examples this last year of running backs who in the past would have gone in the first round or even second round, going in the later rounds. But I think already this season for Miami and for several other teams, we've seen that the running back position is by no means dead, both in running the game and in pass protection. But I wonder if we're going to see the pendulum swing a little bit, because I think that we're seeing a lot more pass-centered defenses, and I wonder if that'll open up a lot more defenses to the run game, and we'll just see the pendulum swing back towards.
If you look at even the kind of what's now being called the best division in football, there are 4 teams that run the ball with Andre Ellington, Zach Stacy, Frank Gore, and Marshawn Lynch, and that's the best division in football, and they're running the ball. So I think that it has swung in certain divisions. That if you don't have the quarterback that can do it, with then the way in which teams they're putting their athletic players, it's quarterback then edge rush, and that's where you prioritize your wealth and talent into those roles, and that's through every level of football. So then obviously filters up to the NFL, where there's a priority on edge rush and a priority on quarterback play.
Yeah, I know
And pass protection.
it's your one of your favorite topics. We all know is the draft, and to me, it's a little bit sickening to look at Carlos Hyde drafted as the 57th overall pick, and not only that, but then going to San Francisco where they got Frank Gore. It's just insane.
And
I
if
wonder. So
Baltimore was healthy, my lord, that would be. I mean,
yeah,
more it was the he would have
do you have it?
won up there now, and it's such a shame that he may never play again. But that's sad.
Do you have?
But I thought it was interesting how NFL teams approached running back this year, and I think we'll see that a lot. And a lot of teams just sat in the position knowing that talent would go undrafted, as Miami did. Then they kind of bought in free agents and UDFAs, and kind of seen that with San Diego getting Oliver, who's been productive, Darren Reeves for Carolina now, Crowell in Cleveland. There's been kind of undrafted talent playing well ahead of kind of players that were drafted, but then I think when you're drafting someone, you're looking at more long-term solutions to as a bell cow back potentially, or a high rotation guy when you're drafting someone. So that's quite interesting. I think the way in which they're drafting backs is kind of changed as well what you're prioritizing.
Before we bore everyone to tears too much by too long of a hangout and we say goodbye, I feel like I need to give you. It's like giving a dog a beautiful bone. I feel like I need to give you a little bit of a chance to talk about running backs in this next year's draft. Have you looked at the running back class at all, and do you have any thoughts? I mean, everybody's obviously talking about Gurley and what happened this week with his suspension. But do you have any thoughts in terms of the running back class, and any thoughts on Gurley specifically?
There's some good talent. I think Gurley's obviously the premier back, and then I think Melvin Gordon behind. I think Gurley can just take over a game, and again, I think it'll be interesting to see where he is drafted. I don't think this will have any effect on him at all. I think basically, kind of the way I look at it now, I think 5 years ago he would have been a top 10 pick, so now that maybe makes him a borderline first rounder. I think that's kind of just how we haven't really seen that kind of talent since what people thought Trent Richardson would be and what he looked like he would be since then. So that's one reason why there hasn't been a first rounder since, and perhaps him not playing up to that expectation kind of reinforced people's belief to devalue the position draft-wise, and also that there's more teams going to a committee. So then if you're not having someone that is having that kind of workload, do you need to invest that sort of resource into them, so spreading resources in kind of a notch below talent, but having a more level, broad talent. It'll be interesting to see, because we saw that kind of DeMarco Murray offer $4 million a year for 4 years. It'll be interesting if he enters the free market. So he's short term. No matter what happens the rest of the year, if he stays relatively healthy, if he stays on this workload, I mean, he'll have probably 10,000 yards or something and a million carries. So I think that may change the dynamic a bit. I really like a couple of players. I think there's probably going to be 10 or 11 good running backs that can go into rotation early. The Boise State, Jay Ajayi, I'm a big fan of. He looks really good. I think one guy who's going to be interesting to watch if this training coaching stuff stays. I think we may see what we saw this year happen again, where they believe they can, again, take the undrafted because of the deprioritization position, and then take players undrafted and almost bulk buy and then groom. I think Kevin Parks will be an interesting player to look at, as he was with Layers for 2 years, Well, he was there for 3 years, but he played for 2. And he used them in a variety of ways. And he's kind of has a diminutive size, kind of like a bowling ball, with really good hands, good kind of lateral agility, and he's an interesting player, can run routes as well. So you can go empty with him in a no huddle if that's how kind of offense ends up progressing into that way where you kind of be more chess PT with him. And he's got really natural hands and a good zone runner and nice patience. So he'll be an interesting player. If you were to draft someone, I would probably wait until the late second day, take the kid with Boise State. He's kind of like an Arian Foster kind of body and mover. So he's quite fluid, looks almost like a wide receiver, quite slim legs, but his legs and upper body kind of move separately. So he's got a really nice way of beating players and kind of deception around the edge or whilst bouncing out. So I think he's an exciting player.
What kind of animal is he?
What kind of animal? Well, that's a good one. I'd say he's kind of a mixture between if there was kind of like a giraffe lizard, that kind of one, like a fast giraffe.
We call that a giraffe. We call that a giraffe in the United States.
Okay, a giraffe. Like a giraffe eater. There you go. Yeah, I'm going to start making these. Maybe we should make like animal collages of prospects. I think it would be fun to do. If anyone is getting this out of context, I'm thinking about trying to make, instead of personifying animals with human traits, I'm going to analyze draft prospects with animal traits in a way in which to describe them without, because I think everyone just kind of, there's a kind of a misconception with draft, when people like comparing players and they'll say, as I was saying, kind of, Ajahi is like Arian Foster. I don't think he's going to be that talented, but he has elements of his game that are similar to that. But what we hear happen is he's like this, oh, he's this player now, not he has traits that are similar to that. So maybe by making them an animal, you can't tell what a cheetah's going to be like at playing football. He may not be either. So I think that may help, or maybe it'll just hinder and confuse a load of people. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, if anything, it'll make it a little bit of a unique approach. I haven't seen any draft prospect analysis where you kind of do the opposite of anthropomorphize something.
Yeah, I need to find a good word for it. It's like zoonification or something, but zoo just sounds bad.
It doesn't sound good though. You need something better than that.
Anyway,
all right.
I think we've talked long enough. Thanks for watching, and look forward to the 2 minutes to the end of the game and Tannehill hitting Gator Hoskins for a game-winning touchdown. On his first snap of the game, there's my prediction.
There you go.
And I guess we'll do this again sometime next week. Thanks, Pablo, and goodbye.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll talk soon again.